Thank you for joining. So my name is Craig R. Harmlin. I work in the Office of International Affairs in Study Abroad at UC Merced. I'm an advisor for a handful of programs, but one of my passion areas is study abroad access, study abroad affordability, and scholarships in particular. So that's a lot of what today's session is really going to be focusing on, is just introducing students to the most common scholarships. Today's session will be recorded. If you are uncomfortable with being recorded, you can simply listen in the background. I plan on stopping the recording once we reach the question and answer period, and you can choose to drop your questions via chat or to unmute yourself at that point. So let's go ahead and get started with the actual session. Okay, so today's agenda. So I want to talk a little bit about how scholarships interact with financial aid in terms of just kind of what you can expect and what they do. So some students are concerned that scholarships will negatively impact their financial aid. And I want to kind of go over what that actually looks like. I want to talk about scholarships that are particularly helpful for UC Merced students. So what scholarships tend to work really well, and then leave a bit of time at the end for question and answer. So first of all, let's talk about scholarships and aid. One of the things that students don't always know, they hear that scholarships can negatively impact their financial aid. Think about it this way. The analogy that was given to me when it came to study abroad or just funding in general is when you get a scholarship and when you have a program cost, all of your financial aid is or your program is a bucket. And all of the aid that goes into it is some sort of liquid. Maybe it's oil, maybe it's water, it doesn't really matter. But your bucket is the size of your program budget. So you can fill it maybe with a little bit of oil, maybe with a little bit of water, or maybe it's milk, whatever the substance is, but you cannot fill that bucket fuller than the top of that bucket. Anything over the top spills out. So financial aid will not package you for more than your program budget, will not put more in your bucket than your bucket can actually hold. And so some of your cost for say a study abroad program might be made up of grants, some of it in scholarships, some of it in loans. In a few students' cases, it might be unmet need. Think of that as just the bucket's not full to the top yet. But let's say it's grants and loans together, and that comes to the top. When it comes to financial aid, what they will do if you pick up a scholarship is maybe they'll scoop out some of the loan out of that bucket and replace it with scholarship. So one of the things when it comes to study abroad is that students who receive financial aid, what will happen is financial aid will start removing from your package or from your bucket those costs, or I should say those forms of financial aid that are least favorable. So they'll start with the least favorable forms of financial aid first and replace those with scholarships. So least favorable, assuming that you have no unmet need, would be things like loans. So starting from Parent Plus loans and unsubsidized student loans, and maybe working their way toward subsidized student loans, they would pull those out of your bucket first and put scholarships in their place. And so students who pick up maybe $2,500 in study abroad scholarships would see potentially $2,500 in loan eligibility replaced with this new scholarship. Maybe it's a $5,000 scholarship, same thing, until you reach the point where your entire bucket is filled with grants and scholarships. At that point, you'll have to start turning down money just because you cannot get more financial aid than your total program cost of attendance. Your total program cost of attendance, just as a reminder for those who've heard before, maybe those who haven't, is what is the total minimum cost to participate in a study abroad program? That's your room and board, your tuition and fees, your books, your transportation, your round trip airfare, maybe pre-departure expenses required for participation, all of those minimum costs in order for you to be able to participate, including travel and health insurance. So keep those in mind. When it comes to study abroad scholarships in particular, most of your scholarships will be need-based, will be competitive scholarships. Some of them will have need components, but essentially scholarships are going to kind of fill one end of the spectrum, whereas your need-based grants are likely to fill the other end of the spectrum when it comes to maybe looking at your budget or the top and bottom ends of your bucket. So from here, I want to launch into the different scholarships, and these are kind of really laid out in my favorite order, but also I think in the order in which we see kind of the greatest return on students' time, invested time, and the likelihood that students are to pick up these scholarships. So today I'm going to focus on kind of 4 scholarships or 4 scholarship groups. So I'm going to start with the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship. We might just call it the Gilman Scholarship. This is one of my favorites because of how well it fits our campus. So it focuses on students with limited financial means. There's a significant component for study abroad diversity, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but really it's about diversifying the students who go abroad, diversifying the destinations to which they go, and diversifying the academic areas for study abroad. It also offers some additional monies for students who are studying critical needs languages. These are languages like Farsi and Urdu or Hindi or Japanese, and a number of others. There's about 15 of them. And so they offer some additional money for students who focus on those languages. The requirements for the Gilman, because it's funded by the US government, it requires US citizenship. It's going to have a Pell Grant eligibility indicator, and this is part of the diversity component. So they're trying to diversify the pool of students, but Pell Grant eligibility is based on kind of access to funding. So take a look at your financial aid package. If you're a Pell Grant recipient, that's likely an indicator for you to be able to participate in the program. You need to participate in a country with a level 1 or level 2 travel advisory only. There are some exceptions where you can apply now in anticipation that the coronavirus situation around the world will improve between now and the point that your program begins. They are allowing virtual exchange and internships right now in this COVID era. So under normal circumstances, that's not necessarily the case. But for example, if your program shifts to online or virtual due to COVID, you may remain eligible for your program, or maybe even if that shift is occurring now. Typically, the program needs to be a minimum of 3 weeks for students at UC Merced. So if it's a 2-country program, it needs to be at least 3 weeks in a single country. And if it's just a single country, the program needs to be at least 3 weeks long, and most are that you'll be pursuing. So how you'll apply for the Gilman. So first of all, you should probably take a look at the website that I've linked at the bottom here. But the deadline to apply is going to be the 2nd of March. So it's usually the first Tuesday in March for students applying for summer, fall, and the academic year. For programs beginning in the spring, that's typically the first Monday in October. This year, that would be the 5th of October. That also happens to be a deadline for early decision for summer participants. So for example, if you're thinking about summer 22, that would be the same deadline if you want an early decision. And that's really helpful for students who need to do financial planning for summer. The components, what's going to be required of you is that you're going to have to submit at least unofficial transcripts. If you're accepted, you might need a little bit more than that, but unofficial transcripts at the point of application. There are some essays required. There's a statement of purpose, and there's community impact statements. And then if you're going to study a critical language, there's an extra essay there as well. And then, of course, there's an online application that students need to fill out, giving enough information about the program to determine that the program is eligible for that particular scholarship, as well as a little bit of background information. We'll talk maybe a little bit more in terms of strengthening the application in the essay section later on. Shifting gears, I want to focus on the Freeman-ASIA Scholarship. This program is really taking a look at study in East and Southeast Asia. So there's about 11, 12, 13 different countries that they're really focusing on. And they're trying to encourage students to get more familiar with that region of the world and to spend usually a significant amount of time, 8, 10, 12 weeks. And so you can kind of get a sense of the award rates, up to 3,000, 5,000, or 7,000, depending on how long you go. The Freeman-ASIA allows not just US citizens, but also permanent residents. But those are the two categories of students. So there is, I believe, some funding also coming from the US government, but also some private funding. And I think that's part of the reason why permanent residents are allowed to participate or to receive the award. Students do need to demonstrate some financial need, but it's not the same requirement as receiving a Pell Grant. So you need to be a financial aid recipient and have some need. You'll need to study again in one of those targeted countries in East or Southeast Asia. The common ones for our students are going to be places like mainland China or Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Thailand, and Singapore and Taiwan. Students need to have a 2.8 GPA. You need to have little or no experience in the host country, especially in the last 5 years. For most students, to be eligible, you'll need to be doing a UC Education Abroad program option only, because most of the other options are going to be too short, or they're not going to meet unit and connection or transfer unit requirements. And then this program cannot be your final semester at UC Merced. So you need to be able to come back and take classes, come back and talk to students as part of the requirements for this program. So it can't be your final term as a UC Merced student. So how you'll apply. This program only has a single application cycle. And that application cycle has a March 30th deadline. It varies a little bit from year to year, but this year they've set that deadline as March 30th. That would include students going abroad as early as summer 21 and going abroad as late as spring 22. So you may need to plan ahead if you're a spring student. If you're a summer student, this is actually one of the latest deadlines for summer scholarships. The components, so again, there'll be an online application, and you can see the link there. It's a little hard to find, but if you copy the link down or review this in the recording, that'll get you to the application site. There's a statement of purpose, there's a service proposal, unofficial transcripts, and they want some information about your financial aid. So they're going to ask to verify that you meet that financial need requirement. The Dutton-Havers Scholars Program. Part of the reason why I like this program is because students who are eligible for it have one of the highest, award rates of any particular award. Part of the reason is so few students are eligible for it in the first place, and a lot of students don't consider their eligibility for study abroad scholarships at the time that they choose a program. But this is one of my favorites because of its award rate. It requires that students focus on year-long study, or that they commit to year-long study. I personally studied abroad for a year. I would recommend it. I wasn't going to do anything less than a year. I knew from the very start. And so so I like this scholarship for that reason, but also because the donor for this particular award feels very passionate that year-long study creates or produces the greatest transformation in students, and so she's trying to reward and incentivize year-long participation. They do look at academic merit. They're hoping for a 3.0 GPA. That's part of what's going on there. It's worth a flat $5,000 for the academic year. There is an extension option. So for example, if you are applying for a fall program this upcoming fall, and you're leaving open the option to extend to the spring in the same country, you would be potentially eligible for the $2,500 extension award. So the Dutton-Haver requirements, because it's a scholarship through the UC Education Abroad program, you do need to apply to one of those programs. It needs to be a year-long program. Again, the extension option would be, say, from fall to year or fall to the spring term. Some countries will allow spring to fall, but that varies from country to country, and sometimes even option to option. You'll need to have a focus on either your major, local culture, or local language. So you'll need to target one of those while abroad as one of the requirements. And then students, hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully, but for greater eligibility, will need to have little previous study abroad experience or none at all. If you did a week-long exchange in high school, that's usually not going to count much against you. But if you did a semester before, that might disadvantage you a little bit. How and when to apply. So these are pretty standard deadlines. It's an online application. So March 1 for the academic year. For the calendar year, that's typically October 1. And it's an online application that you access. Usually the access point is through the UCEAP application portal. So if you're applying for UCEAP, that's where you do your application for study abroad in general. That's also where you would also be able to find the scholarship application link. Components, there are a number of statements. There's a letter of recommendation requirement. There's an online application, and then they're asking for a little bit of financial information because they want to kind of get a sense that this will have some sort of financial impact on you, even if you're not a traditional financial aid recipient. And then this last group is actually kind of a group or category of awards that share a single application. So UCAP established some time ago, maybe 10 years ago, this group of awards that came to be known as the UCAP Promise Awards. And then there have been a number of other named scholarships and awards kind of grouped and lumped in together into a single application. And so especially the Promise Awards are focusing on access, although some of them might have other secondary purposes to promote particular awards. So academic merit is certainly factored in. They're taking a look at also maybe a number of diversity goals, especially diversifying the pool of students going to study abroad. They're targeting some of these underrepresented cohorts are going to overlap, especially with the Gilman, but I would say some of the ones that the Promise Awards in particular is going to look at is first-generation college students, high financial needs students, transfer students, students in STEM fields or pursuing STEM studies, maybe students pursuing internships, as well as veterans. There aren't very many veterans, but veteran students, reentry students, and students who can make the case that they are underrepresented or that they have unique challenges and obstacles as barriers to study abroad. The Promise Awards are typically worth $1,000 for the summer and $2,000 per semester. There are named awards that are kind of in this, I think, $1,000 to $2,500 range. You apply to a whole pool of scholarships, and if you're eligible for multiple, you select that you want to be considered for multiple. And if you would likely be awarded for one or two, you're not going to get multiple, but you would get the highest award available to you based on your eligibility. You can receive, especially the Promise Awards, multiple times. but it's once per term. So let's say you are a year-long student with a summer intensive language program at the beginning. You could get it for summer, then for fall, then for spring, and you would apply with each award cycle and be potentially awarded up to $5,000 under the Promise Awards program. You know, $1,000 and then $2,000 for each of the subsequent semesters. And I've already mentioned the named awards. So the Promise Awards requirements, they're pretty basic, even though they are considering academic merit in the application and in the awards. The main requirements that needs to be a UCAP option. If it's a named award, there's usually a specific field, a specific country or program, or maybe set of universities. It may be a specific term, so maybe not summer, maybe it needs to be a semester or year, depending on the named award. Some of them I know are for places like Italy, for Spain, for France, the UK. Some of them may be about studying a language or studying, you know, specifically for a semester. The deadlines are typically the 15th of February for programs beginning in summer, the 15th of March for programs beginning in fall. And if things kind of go back to normal or closer to normal in this COVID era, I would expect the 15th of September. It was a little bit later this past time around, but that was mostly due to coronavirus. But I would expect it would likely revert back to the 15th of September. And the apps usually open up about 6 to 8 weeks before the deadline. The components are pretty simple for these. It's usually just an online application and a statement of purpose. So shifting gears, now that I've introduced kind of the 4 main scholarship categories, I want to give you some tips and some guidance about improving your scholarship chances and how to get a little bit more help. And then I want to leave open some time for question and answer at the very end. So first of all, we as advisors are willing and able to give you advice on your scholarship applications, your essays, your materials to help you think through some of your goals, etc. We expect, though, that you give us a week's notice before your deadline in order to be able to give you feedback. We even have scholarship-specific appointments that you can schedule with us. But talk to us about your projects. We want to make sure that they're realistic, that they're going to be impactful. Those are really going to be the 2 main issues when it comes to, say, the Gilman Scholarship or the Freeman-ASIA Award, or maybe a potential other award that we're less familiar with. When it comes to your application, we really want you to put your best foot forward, especially when it comes to the essay. So by the time that you're applying for a scholarship, your academic record is pretty fixed. You can't really do a whole lot there. Your online application is really just about filling in your personal information and disclosing maybe some of your demographic information. But where you have the best chance to put your best foot forward is in your essays, especially a statement of purpose. For a statement of purpose, we really encourage you to do your best, take advantage of the Writing Center resources, take advantage of multiple reviews, make sure that you're writing to the objectives of the scholarship. Focus on fit, especially academic fit first, career fit, maybe have some personal enrichment goals. Maybe your country or your destination, your host university has specific benefits to what your goals are. Maybe it's learning a language or learning a culture, focusing on local art, or maybe it's a specific field of study or to work with a particular professor. And then one of the things in a statement of purpose is make sure that they understand how that scholarship would make your program more financially accessible to you. Some additional pointers, start as early as possible. It's pretty late now for some summer awards, but it's not impossible. We still have about 13 days before the Promise Awards deadline. but proofread, get especially some outside eyes looking on your essay. If you're applying for, say, the Gilman or another one that's really trying to get students to look outside of kind of common study abroad destinations outside of Europe and Australia and New Zealand, have a good reason. You know, if you're a physics major, do they offer great physics in Australia? If you, you know, if you're studying, let's say, economics or psychology, did you choose maybe the Netherlands on purpose because of the coursework that they offer there? For the Gilman and Promise Awards, because they have diversity components, I encourage you, as much as you're comfortable, to disclose your personal diversity and how you fit the diversity goals in the context of the prompts. They don't make assumptions based on your name. They don't make assumptions based on UC Merced being a Hispanic serving institution or an Anapizi, an Asian American, Native American and Pacific Islander serving institution. They don't make those assumptions based on your name, your demographics, your information. You need to put that in context, sometimes for the reader to be able to understand how you've been personally impacted by maybe obstacles, or you're personally inspired to study abroad because of that background. And very briefly, I want to throw out some other scholarships for you to consider, some other resources to consider. The Bourne Awards, if you're thinking pretty far in advance, so it's too late for 21-22, but if you're thinking about 22-23, or even as a grad student, there's some scholarship opportunities there. There are maybe some scholarship opportunities for specific countries. Critical Language Scholarship, that's already closed for summer of 21, but summer of 22 should be opening up in the fall. That's usually going to be due in November, December. The Fund for Education Abroad, it's late for the summer or fall of 21, but the spring application should be opening later this spring, I believe, or over the summer. And then you can look at some other resources for scholarships. IIE, that's Institute for International Education, has some travel grants and scholarships. So you can look at studyabroadfunding.org that I've listed on here. If you're studying abroad outside of UCEAP, let's say you're studying abroad on semester at sea or another program provider that's not the UC Education Abroad program, take a look at their scholarships, what they offer. And then also consider non-study abroad awards, as long as they don't specifically forbid study abroad, that might be open to you. So at this point, I've listed some of the links to access scholarships, the ones that I focused on today, but I want to leave open the floor for questions. I'm going to stop the recording here in just a moment.